walking long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message, we didn't put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We feel it inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's get it. We got the power. Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I'll see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Yeah, turn it up. We got the power. Come on, is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got the power. Woo. Yeah, get it turned up. We got the power. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We got the power. We got the power. Yeah, let's go now. We got the power. Let's go. We got the power.
Hey folks. Alright, so welcome back. We're on to the final session of this first wave of training for the Unreal Engine Short Film Challenge Australia. Good program, bad acronym. So welcome everybody back. Today we're going to be covering an intro to technical art. Now, this is going to be a bit of a strange one. Technical art, for anyone that's unfamiliar with it, is essentially that place between programming and art. Like, where do these two things meet, and how do we minimize the burden for both programmers and artists? You know, so this role may sound like a strange one, but a good technical artist can shave like weeks or months off of a project. You know, because they're able to just have substantially improved like setups for certain things. They're able to set up shaders that do things that people may not expect. You know, they're very valuable. So for this project, I'm hoping that along the way I can show you a couple of things that you may not have expected, you may not have considered possible or likely, and consequently kind of broaden everyone's perspective on things. This is going to be a little bit similar to the intro to VFX session the other day, where it's going to be a little bit more free reign, less of a structured, structured set out thing, but rather I've got a couple of demos that I want to move through, just things that I think are worth showing and demonstrating. And I'm going to do my best to kind of step through all of those as we go along. But if you have any questions or you're curious about how something could be used, please let me know. Now, I've done this whole introduction without reintroducing myself, so I'll do that just for anyone that is joining in as this is their first session. My name is Chris Murphy. I handle evangelism in Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia for Unreal Engine. On the we have Tony Reed and Alex Stevens. Tony is the one that came up with this whole short film challenge idea, and he can answer any questions with regards to competition issues or questions, queries. While at the same time, we have Alex Stevens, who is an engineering background. So while I can answer a lot of the questions with regards to technical art in general, Alex can handle things on a more low level that may be useful for some of these things. Alex is currently the one that's wielding the Unreal Engine chat command. So if you see that popping up, that's actually Alex. Okay, so before I go into anything today, I actually want to quickly make sure that everybody is aware of this environment. Now, the project I have open in front of me right now is the content examples from Unreal Engine. Now, you can load this yourself by just going to the Learn tab of Unreal Engine. And I strongly recommend that anyone that's using UE for the first time has this content examples project installed. The reason that I'm selecting this room in particular, this level in particular, is called the Math Hall. Now, I'm going to be upfront. Math Hall sounds like where you would get sent for detention in high school, but I swear to you that it's valuable, because if we open this up and we hit play, here's how the Math Hall works. If you walk into an environment, it actually shows you how various mathematical functions work and what the result of changing certain things in them would do. So I can see that an abs function here is kind of mirroring an effect. If I go over here, I can see what a frac function is doing, and I can see what changing various values within these things would result in. I bring this up because, this runs through all of the math that may be involved in a lot of the things that I'm doing today, and I want you to be aware that this exists. And you can tell this room was made by a programmer because the examples are on one side and the math behind it is on the other side. So this actually gives you a pretty solid breakdown of just different kinds of effects and what they're doing, and then it'll step through and be like, so here is what a height lerp does. You can see that it's lerping in through the cracks before it covers everything else. But I can see on this side, like conceptually speaking, here is what a height lerp does. And like for a lot of the stuff that I've brought up in some of the previous sessions as well, like obviously this is going into various things like lerps and sine waves and whatever else, and that's great. But I brought it in previous sessions. I know that I've just suddenly dropped in words like vector, and you were probably like, but Chris, what's a vector? Well, that's why there's also an introduction to vector math here, and it explains what is a vector. It explains like how vectors work, 2D vectors, how that works in for measuring distance, what that looks like if you want to measure distance in Blueprint, or if you want to measure distance in Material Editor, how to visualize a vector and all of this stuff. So kind of just going through this and this kind of mathematical functions, like we've all heard of a dot product. What is a dot product? Well, I mean, I can just look at it and be like, oh, I get it. A dot product tells me how well two things align. Why didn't anyone ever explain it to me like this? So this is pretty useful. It'll break down a whole lot of different things. And I strongly recommend that if you get confused by some of the stuff you see in some materials, you consider going back to this at some point and using it to improve your learning. Okay, so as I said, content examples, Math Hall. Now I'm going to switch over to an actual editor now. All right, so here we go, switching over. So this is a basic environment. You can see that we have set up. This is really bare bones. So I wanted something that was kind of clean to set up. I wanted something that was kind of just reasonably straightforward for us to do some effects in. So if you're like, Chris, where is all the pretty? Sorry, all I've done is add grass. So keep this in mind. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to approach a problem that a lot of developers face when handling landscapes. Actually, it's less of a problem, but more of a time-saving measure that we can implement. And that is, I'm going to select modes, and I'm going to go down to landscape, okay? Now, when I'm inside of the landscape view, we're all aware by this point from the previous training sessions that, I can select any parts and I can just paint in, okay? And, painting in this kind of stuff is useful. But if we think about what we have here on this landscape, grass often doesn't really do what we're seeing there. Like if I was to go to sculpt and grab a flatten brush, and let's say I did something really aggressive here, like I pulled this across. That looks kind of weird. So, we're going to consider, like, is there anything we could do that would just fix this without us having to think about it? Okay. So I want you to keep that in mind. This is the problem that we're trying to fix. So to fix it, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to launch Quixel Bridge, and I'm going to quickly import some cliff assets into my project. So just give me one moment to launch Bridge. So for anyone that's unfamiliar with it, Quixel Bridge is the tool that is freely available to all Unreal Engine users. You can use it if you're not a UE user for your other projects, but it's actually completely free if you are an Unreal Engine dev. Now, in this case, what I want to do is I want to bring in some assets. So Quixel Bridge lets me just grab anything. Now, I could do a search for the word cliff and just grab things here. I could bring in 3D meshes, I could bring whatever I need. In this case, I've already gone ahead and I've grabbed some assets that are under surfaces, and I've already downloaded this rock cliff 2x2 meter, which is just this asset here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna export this into the project that we're working on here, which is, just gonna get this running. We're gonna bring it into Tech Art Workshop 1, and I'm just going to import all of its textures, or at least the ones that I've selected. I'm going to keep it at 2K just for memory saving. We've had a question come through, and they said, will there only be one team per state able to participate? This seems like a lot of people will miss out. So we have up to 16 applicants that are allowed into it. However, we're guaranteeing one per region. Okay, so that means that each agency that's involved can guarantee at least one of their teams will be involved, but we actually will pick up to 16. So if we see a couple of applicants from certain areas that have really great pitches, then one region might have a couple more than another region, perhaps. So. But I can't give you specifics on what that's going to look like, because until people submit, I honestly don't know myself. Anyway, I've exported this in, I've dragged in these rock cliffs, and that's just come straight into my build of Unreal. Okay. Now, for what we're going to do, I'm going to work just for this time being on these assets. So let's. I'm going to get a little bit more screen real estate with what we're doing today, just so it's a bit more comfortable for everyone that's looking at what's going on. If we were to go ahead and make this cliff material from scratch, or something similar to it, it would be pretty straightforward. We would create the material. I'm just going to call this m_cliff, and we would often just drag these textures into the cliff material and kind of just plug everything in there. So, I can just say, hey, this texture represents the base color. Sorry, folks, there we go. This texture represents the roughness. This texture represents the normal. I'm going to ignore the displacement texture that I just dragged in for the time being. Okay, so I've got these kind of put in there, and I'm just going to click apply and save. Okay. Now, if I was to apply this material, I would literally just drag the cliff material onto this, and you can see that we have pretty basic cliff material going on here. But what I want to look at here is I would like to actually align this to the world. So what I would like to do is, if two objects that look the same kind of line up with one another, their cliff textures and such would always kind of match each other. And what this means is I need to create something that is world aligned. Okay. Someone says, how do you know which texture applies to what? When you import it, it's called _roughness _normal _albedo, which is color. Hopefully that helps. So anyway, as I was saying, what I would like to do is create a world-aligned texture. And that's going to help me resolve this cliff issue. Because if we look at this and I just temporarily turn off grass, see how the texture here is kind of stretching as it goes down? One of the things that we're going to need to solve is I would love to project cliff wherever there is cliff. But I need to make sure that that cliff, wherever it's doing this, isn't stretching in quite the same way that we're seeing here. It might be a little bit tricky to see on the stream, but this is definitely stretching. Okay, so I need to do two things. I need to be able to project a cliff onto this, and I need to be able to make sure that these cliff textures are being projected onto it. And this will make a little more sense in a second. So the first thing that I want to show you here, and this is really useful if you haven't properly UV'd your asset, is you may want to consider the world aligned texture node. Because watch this, if you don't have UVs on your asset, you can actually use a node called world aligned texture. Now, how this works is it actually projects. If you imagine that you had like a projector pointed at an object, it actually just projects that color straight onto it without actually using the UVs directly. It uses the world location. Now, I can't just plug this in. It will tell me it's not compatible. And the reason for that is this is after a reference to an object of a texture, whereas the output here is giving me the color. And I know that sounds like a strange difference, but essentially how it works is you need to convert these to a texture object first. And if you convert them to an object and plug them in, it will now allow you to plug these in. Okay. Now I'm going to quickly just step through. I know I'm kind of breezing through this one, but hopefully when you see the result, it'll better explain why I've done what I've done. Okay, so once again, I'm just converting it to an object and plugging it in. It's worth noting that there is a separate node called world aligned normal that you use for normal maps instead. Now, if I plug these three in, oops, X, Y, Z. If I plug these three in, and we still have our cliff applied. It's a bit smaller by default because I haven't set it up correctly. Oops, sorry, folks. There we go. It's a little bit smaller, but you'll notice that as I move the cube up, notice that the rock isn't actually changing its location. Do you see that? And that's because that's now world aligned, so it's actually projected through world space. So as I kind of move this sideways, those are staying in the same spot. Okay? So the reason that I've done this is this means that we're not going to get any tearing whenever we project onto surfaces like the one that we saw just before, which is really, really useful. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to step through and I'm going to look at projecting this onto this surface. Okay. So I'm just going to copy these, Control C, and I'm going to open up the material for the landscape. Someone said like a 3D texture projection. Exactly. So I'm actually going to go ahead and project these onto our landscape. Now this is my simple landscape material. It's just got dirt, it has grass, and I'm doing some distance blending, etc, etc. So what I'm going to be doing is at the very end of my material, so the very last step after it's calculated what all the grass and dirt and all of that stuff looks like, is I'm gonna come to here and I'm gonna actually say I want to blend the current material that we have. By the way, if you hold Control while clicking on one of these, it lets you grab the wire instead of like re-dragging it out, which is just a nice little time saver. I want to grab this channel here and I want to blend in the material that we created a moment ago. As another quick step, if you hit Q, your nodes will automatically straighten up. You can use Shift D to align right, or Shift A to align left. which are also really useful too. Anyway, so again, today's session is following on from some assumed knowledge from some of the previous sessions that we have. So you may remember from previous sessions that I created little materials inside of materials. And that's what I'm going to be doing here. I'm going to be following this through and just creating a texture that is color, roughness, and normal. And what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to blend this into this. So this is going to be adding this into this in some way. Now, the next thing that I need to determine when working on this kind of setup is I need to determine how to actually blend that in. Like, how do I make it so that only bits that go vertical, like we saw over here, change? Now, fortunately, we can actually just look at the direction that a surface is facing. If I was actually to type in normal, so the vertex normal, and preview this node literally tells me which direction something is facing. If you think of X, Y, and Z, which you can see the coordinates for down here, as red, green, and blue, the more something is facing along the X-axis, the redder it gets. And you can see that here. See, as it goes left, we've got red. As it goes that way, it goes black. And the reason for that is it's negative red. The more something goes upwards, the Z-axis, it's going to be bluer. So this information actually tells us, this information kind of tells you, which direction something's facing. And if I was to say to this with a component mask, hey, tell me what's only on your blue channel, what it shows me is this. Now, what this is actually doing is this is saying, at this location, when something's facing sideways, it's going to black. When something is facing perfectly upwards, it's a value of 1. And when something is facing downwards, it's a negative value. So it's a value of -1. Okay? So what I'm actually doing here is, by using this, I'm actually able to say to this, hey, I want to plug you into the alpha. I'm going to run another step first, which is called saturating. You don't need to do it. A saturate just stops any values being below 0 or above 1. Okay, and then let's plug this in. And I'm going to go back and take a quick look at what that looks like in the world. So for anyone that asked, yes, this is triplanar mapping, is a term you may be more familiar with in your various content creation package. Give this just a second. Sorry, folks, I should warn you that the building materials is... Landscape materials take the longest to build, so it takes a little bit for us to get a preview on any of these things. But we can see here now that this is painting cliff in immediately whenever this goes sideways. It's a very small cliff right now, and so it needs some variation going in. But we can see conceptually that that's working, you know. And if I was to go back to my landscape tools and I was to say, hey, you know, I want to pull areas out of here, I can grab that and just pull it out, and that's going to automatically paint in some cliff. I'm actually going to go back into my material and I'm going to just turn the grass off completely, just until we need it. But hopefully you can all kind of see where this is going. You know, like I'm able to now kind of dynamically just kind of paint these things in there. And the strength of that is that it's able to kind of just, I can just grab areas. It'll automatically look like a cliff when it needs to look like a cliff. Everything can just work, live in harmony, that whole thing. Okay. So while that's building, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually address the next problem. Because the next problem is the material size was tiny. Like you may have noticed that it was just very, very, very small. Unfortunately, there's a node that's just called texture size that we can plug a value into. So I'm going to plug a value into here that is called cliff texture size. And I'm going to default this to say 2048. Saw someone post a comic the other day that said, do you consider 2048 a nice round number, or are you normal? And it's really stuck with me since, because yes, I consider it a nice round number. Okay, so I'm just gonna put this in. Great. So I've plugged in this this cliff texture size just as a general thing for us to work on. I'm gonna hit save. Alex is groaning at me digitally, I see. Actually, while this is going on, I'm going to close down Quixel Bridge. Okay, so I've just plugged in a value that says cliff texture size into this texture size property. And if we were to go back to here and look at what we've got, just a second. We can now see that at any point that I want to cliff, I can kind of just pull this out. Oops. Anytime it saves, it's going to go square for just a second, and then it'll get its act together. Great. So you can see here that we're now just kind of able to grab these things and just wherever we want, kind of pull things out. And the cliff's going to start looking a bit more like a cliff. And, you know, the cool part of this is the more you're kind of running like erosion over these kind of environments, obviously that's very, very drastic, the results that I've put in. But see how just kind of like nicely getting some of these kind of coming in just creates a more realistic environment pretty quickly. And wherever this pulls up, it starts to adjust accordingly. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually add in a lot of extra stuff here. Like, there's nothing that stops you from doing things like adding in strata to the rock formation, so you can see like that different dirt layering effect over height. That would be just another world-aligned texture that you would just kind of drop in there, and everything would be fine. So, you know, and that would just add a slight discoloration. But like I said, by doing what I've just done here, it stops you from having to necessarily paint in the cliff if you don't want to. Don't get me wrong, if you really want to, you can. Nothing is stopping you. But hopefully the benefits here are at least reasonably straightforward with what I did. And again, like conceptually speaking, all I did was make the material that you would make if you were making a cliff. I used the world-aligned texture node so that it would project and we wouldn't have any stretching ever. And, you know, down here, all I've done is I've literally said, hey, I want to find which way is up and blend this in accordingly. Because that's it. And by the way, one thing that I really want to stress the importance of is, so when I made this cliff texture size that we saw here, one of the great things about this cliff texture size is by making it a parameter, you can actually just click on it and change the value and find the scale that is right for your environment. You know, so I can actually just kind of change that dynamically without having to recompile. So I can be like, actually maybe this looks best at about 15:2. Okay, so having something like that is just really useful for saving time because, you know, you can just dynamically change it to find the right value, and then when you're happy with it, just hit save and ship it. So that was the first of the things that I wanted to cover here. The next thing that I would like to cover is I would like to cover. So I'm just pulling up my list. Running vertex colors on assets. Okay, so vertex painting. And my apologies again if I've come in like super hard with like starting with something that seems pretty complex. This session's going to be a little all over the shop with some easy and some harder stuff. So hopefully this hasn't disheartened too many people. We haven't had too many folks drop off. I guess we'll see. But the next thing I want to demonstrate is asset color painting. Okay, so with this in place, we can see that we've got something going on that looks all right. But let's do something a little more interesting. let's go ahead and grab a rock from the project. Okay. Just going to drag this into the scene. Now I got to warn you, this rock is not a Quixel rock. Please do not judge it. It was actually made for a mobile game, so it's not the highest res texture I've ever seen. Okay, so give this just a second. As I said, not the finest hour for assets, but it'll do in demonstrating what I'm about to make. I should stop being so apologetic for this one rock. I'm probably making it feel bad. But what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to take a quick look at the material that it's got, which is thankfully incredibly simple. Okay, really, really straightforward. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that and just make a new one that's called m_vertex paint rock. Okay. So this is going to be what we're working with. Now, what I'm actually going to do is, just because I like using that setup that we looked at earlier, just because I like using that setup of blending materials together, I'm actually going to build it like that again. So once again, instead of just plugging in these nodes manually, I'm going to use the use material attributes node, and I'm just going to add them in as I see fit. So I'm just going to say base color, roughness, and normal. Okay. So this is the exact same thing. Nothing fancy here. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore the color values here for just a second. Okay. And instead, I'm going to add a thing called vertex color. And I'm just going to plug this in. Okay, nothing too fancy, I've just plugged vertex color straight in. Now, if I was to look at the assets in the world, so I'm going to apply this material to the rock, you'll see here that we just have a white rock. Okay. Now, the reason that I've done this is we can now use a technique called mesh painting. And if I go to mesh painting, I'm actually able to paint information onto this mesh. So watch what happens if I was to say I wanted to remove the red and the blue. Sorry, the green and the blue. I can now shift click to unpaint, or just left click to paint in. Okay, so I can actually kind of just do whatever I need to straight onto the asset. And that's all right. That's kind of cool. I can see the advantage to potentially having something like this. But what I would really love to do here, that I think is going to be a lot more useful, is I would love to get this rock and I would love to change some properties based on that vertex color. So I'm going to plug in this base color right back in, get back to where we started. However, this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little section that says, all right, let's get the roughness value. Sorry, let's get the roughness value and then let's so I'm getting the roughness value and I'm going to be resetting the roughness value, but this time the roughness value is going to be equal to whenever this vertex color, whenever the red channel is fully white, so whenever the red channel is fully applied, it's going to be whatever is in the B value, which is regular roughness. However, whenever we remove roughness, I want to actually lerp the roughness value down to a value of 0.1. So we're going to make it shinier as we remove the red value. Okay. So the rock looks normal, but this time, watch what happens as I unpaint, shift click. Maybe a little tricky to see. I probably should have gone all out on that roughness value. Let's go all the way down to 0. So as I kind of paint this in, we can now paint roughness in and out. Now, I'm going to make this a bit more obvious, don't worry. I'm going to make this a bit more obvious because I'm going to go back to here and I'm going to say, all right, so we're changing the roughness, but while we're at it, let's also change the base color a bit as well. And what I'm going to say is, again, as the vertex color value comes in, whenever there is no wetness, I want this to be here. Whenever there is wetness, I want this to now be the current color multiplied by, I don't know, let's say 0.4. Kind of pulling that number out of thin air, but hopefully it works. All right, so I'm actually telling it, I'm going to put in a reroute node just so it's a bit cleaner. So whenever you're meant to be wet, you're also meant to be darker. Okay? Now watch what happens this time. So if I unpaint it, dry rock, and if I paint it in, you can see we're now able to kind of just paint in that level of wetness here. Which is useful because, you know, this doesn't have to be the wetness that's being applied. This could be any number of other things that are going in there. You know, I could be painting in moss, or I could be painting in not moss, I don't know, something else. So we could be blending all sorts of things in here as appropriate. Okay, so I just want to make sure people were aware of the vertex color and the fact that you can just kind of access this data and do whatever you kind of need with it. So yeah, please keep that one in mind. I'm going to save that. One thing that I didn't show you before that I should have, but I forgot about is I'm going to go back to my my landscape material for just a second. I realized I left part of it unfinished. One thing I didn't show you was how to fix the grass. So if I was to reapply the grass value here, it won't work right now because what we're going to see is the grass is going to be going wherever there is cliff. So to fix that, we literally just do the exact same logic that we did before, which was if I was to look at this and see anywhere that's facing up, I can actually access this information and just say to it, you know, hey, let's go ahead and subtract, say, let's subtract 5.25 and then round that. So you can now see that by rounding it, I'm rounding it to between 0 or 1. By multiplying this against the original grass value, wherever it's black, regardless of whether there's grass there or not, it's going to be grass times 0, which means no grass. And whenever it's grass times white, it means there is grass. Now I pulled 0.25 out as an arbitrary number. Maybe 0.4 is going to be better. And if I click apply, this will now go through. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to make sure I covered that. My apologies for not covering it beforehand. I kind of just looked at it and said, this is good, and moved on, but forgot about one extra smaller topic that I had to cover. Okay, so we've got ourselves that rock that we worked on before. I'm going to let this finish its build. Almost. Alright, my 0.4 value is way too aggressive. You can now see that it's turning the grass off, but maybe a little too early. I'm not too sure here, so we could work with this as we saw fit. But hopefully that still gives you an idea of being able to kind of control the grass with that value and why that's useful. Okay, so back on track. Let's do it. So the next thing that I want to quickly demonstrate is vertex animations. Okay, so a vertex animation looks like this. I'm going to go back to my original rock material that we had, this vertex paint rock. I'm going to duplicate it and call it m_vertex animation. Okay, so this is the same rock material that I've been using this whole time. This time I'm going to delete all of the painting stuff that we just put into it. So this is back to being the original material setup that we had. Okay. Great. Now I'm going to apply the rock static mesh in the editor just so we can see it. So to do this, for anyone that's unfamiliar with it, I select the rock in the material editor, sorry, in the content browser, and then I select the little teapot, and that will now apply the rock as the mesh that we're previewing. Okay, so this is the fun part. If we get something like this, we can go ahead and we can actually do some stuff that you may not be aware of. Okay, I'm gonna set an extra material attribute on this, and this attribute I'm setting is called world position offset, which is somewhere right in there. It is right in front of me. Okay, so for everyone watching what's going on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in a value into it, and I'm going to plug in the value 00500, and I want you to pay close attention to the rock. I want you to pay close attention to this rock as we plug this value in and what it does. Everyone catch that? So the rock moved upwards. Okay. Now, okay, that's kind of weird. What happens if I plug in a value that was just 500? So not just on the B channel. It moved diagonally. You see that? So I want you to think about why that's taking place. Like what's going on there. And the reason for it is world position offset takes in a position that says this is the offset to the current vertice that we're looking at. So if something has 00500 applied to it, it's moving 500 units upwards. If something has just the number 500, it's moving it in the X, Y, and Z direction, which is why we get this diagonal movement. Okay? So with that in mind, what that tells us is we have the ability to move vertices around. But what else can we do with that? So first off, the thing that we can do is we can get this, and if I wanted to multiply it against the vertex normal, 500 is probably way too big of a value here. It's an obscene value. I'm going to turn this to just 100. And here's what we've got. We've kind of created a much fatter rock, because what we're actually doing is every single vertice looks at the direction that they're facing and then moves themselves out that amount. Okay, so they're kind of just being shifted out as appropriate. I can see some people in the chat are exchanging emails. That's fine. Go for it. You will be automatically censored by Google for typing in an email address. So just watch it. It may be a good idea to add some square brackets or something so that bots don't pick you up and send spam your way. Anyway, so we can see here that, all right, if I was to multiply this by the vertex normal, we're now actually able to move each vertice in a different direction. We're not just moving the whole rock. And if I was to get a sine wave, or specifically a debug sine wave, a debug sine wave goes from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, all right? Black to white, black to white. Which means if I times this value that we can see here it's actually going to go from 0 to 1 times 100 becomes 0 to 100. When I multiply that against the vertex normal, what we see is this. Kind of somehow accidentally created a rock heart. Okay. So this is the kind of stuff that, this is where we start to kind of create some really interesting effects, some really interesting ideas, because this is, we can move vertices around in different directions and we can change them over time, right? So let's do something that's a step beyond this. At any time, I can look at an object's position, and I can see where it is in space, right? So if I was to get I'm just gonna move these away for a little bit. If we wanted to, we could look at where any vertex is in space, okay? Now, the reason I bring this up is because when I preview this, we actually have different information here, okay? So what we can actually see when we do this is that the world position is, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. We can choose to make interesting changes to just things in one area or one aspect or one axis. So what I mean by that is if we got the world position and we looked at just the blue channel with what we have here. Now I know that's incredibly bright, but notice that there's a black ring down the bottom. That's because technically the pivot point for this object, like 0, 0, 0, is actually sitting a bit above. It's sitting around here. But if we imagine that this value that we're looking at here is, like that line, exactly where it changes, is 0. Now, if you remember the sessions that we've had previously, this value that I'm getting here is its position in space. Now, the reason this is the reason that's important to us is it tells us that this value that is 1 centimeter above this line is a value of 1. This value that is a meter above this line is a value of 100. 2 meters above the line, 200, etc., etc. Okay? So I bring this up because what that tells us is this is the distance to this line. And if I wanted to, I could say, if we use a function called min, sorry, not min, max, and I max with 0, keep in mind that any of these black values are actually negative values, whereas these white values are all super positive, okay? Now, the reason I'm using this max function is a max function says, take the biggest of two things going into it. So never get anything that is a value in the negatives, is what I've essentially just done. Now, the reason that I've done this is if we were to get these values, I want you to look at what happens when I offset the position I times this by 0, 0, negative 1, and I plug this into the offset. Watch what happens to the rock. The entire rock has essentially been squished down to that exact spot. Because what's happening is if we look at the values that we had a moment ago, if this is giving me a value here of 1 meter, then it's a value of 100. And this is now telling it to move 100 units downwards. This value up here that is at 200 is now going to be being told to move 200 downwards. Okay? Now, what's really interesting with that is if you think about this line in space that we have, like if you think about this value that we can see here, this black value here, that's actually really arbitrary because nothing stops us from, over time, moving that line. Because if I was to add a value to it of, say, 100, it'd move downwards. negative 100 moved upwards. You see that? So if I got my my debug time sign, that value that goes between 0 and 1, and I told it to now go between, say, negative 500 and 150, I want you to watch what happens. We're now able to shift this line. More importantly, when I preview this, we're collapsing all of those vertices down as we see fit. Pretty big rock. Might actually be like negative 800 or something. There we go. So, we can see that we're here. We can start to do some kind of interesting effects that you may not have expected us to necessarily be able to do. And I know this is a strange one to focus on, but I'm kind of just trying to open some minds here with how this works. Okay. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is we can see that this is now shifting up and down. But I mean, if we look at all the data that we've got, let's consider what else we can do with what's here. For instance, if I was to preview this, so this white area is positive and this black area is negative values, okay? Now what that actually tells me is that if we, imagine it for a second, if we got all of the negative values, okay? We got all the negative values and we made them positive, okay? So if I was to run an absolute function, that's what that does. Now, it might be a little tricky to see, but you will see a black line kind of dancing up and down. Now, the reason that we can see this black line dancing up and down is because that little line represents the values where we went from 1 to 0 and then 0 to negative 1, which is now from 1 to 0 and 0 to 1 again. And if I wanted to, you know, we can make this a little bit easier to see by making sure nothing goes above 1. I said it would be easy to see, but that's totally way harder to see. So I'm just going to divide this. I'm going to divide it by 10, just so we've got a 20 centimeter line. There you go. So see, now we've actually got a line that's moving up and down with what we had. And if we were to get that value and say 1 minus that value, we now, instead of having a black line moving up and down, we have a white line moving up and down. And if I wanted to multiply that against like an obscenely bright color to just make something cool and add it to the emissive channel, I could do that too. Can add. I'm just going to make this a value of say 120. Oops, sorry, I'm still previewing this. Now keep in mind that like this value that I'm reading in here with the debug time sign, this could just be a value that we've put in there. Like nothing stops me from setting this to be a parameter that you're controlling in sequencer to do some crazy sci-fi effects. Okay, so I wanted to kind of flag that this stuff was even possible to begin with, because again, like there's a lot of people who just kind of rule it out. They go, nah, that seems like a wizard did it. Conceptually speaking, the math isn't super hard. It's not super easy either, I guess, but it's not groundbreakingly tricky, because you can kind of create some really, really interesting effects and visuals that you can't achieve with particle effects. So I wanted to flag this as, again, just an area to consider how this works. Now, if you give me just one moment, I'm going to open up another example in background. Okay. One moment. Someone said, is object collision affected by a script like this? No, it is not. So this will still be a full rock as far as the engine is concerned. Cool. So I wanted to open up the content examples because I wanted to open up a level that I think is very worthwhile pointing out to everybody here called Pivot Painter 2. Now, a lot of folks aren't aware of this, but in the Unreal Engine engine folder, there's actually a bunch of Max scripts and Maya scripts that we use internally at Epic for all sorts of weird and wonderful purposes, okay? And one of those scripts is called Pivot Painter 2. This is a 3ds Max script, and it actually has a bunch of... it's a way of baking out information to do really, really interesting effects that we... that are similar to the one that I just showed you, but even more advanced. Someone said, Chris, can you do something similar with meshes and everything inside a cube is visible and the rest is invisible? Yeah, you totally could. You just use a cube mask. So I'm just going to give this a second. Unfortunately, I forgot to compile this level earlier, so I'll just give it just a second. In the meantime, Alex, have we had any questions come through that are worth me fielding for the next just a minute or so while this is building?
Not really. Just mostly conversation about organizing teams.
Okay, cool. I'll let it be then. Okay, so I'll give this just a minute. It's just compiling as we go. Sorry about that, folks. Nearly there. Unfortunately, this machine takes a bit longer to compile shaders whenever I'm running OBS, I've noticed. So when I was doing the quick practice run of some of these effects before the session, I was like, sick, I can smash through these. And then the second I start streaming, it's like, no time for experimental. Give it just a minute. Someone said, is this the content samples project? Yeah, this is the content examples project that is available in the Learn tab. So for anyone that wants to know where this project is, just moving it across. To access this yourself, you would just go to the Learn tab inside of the Unreal Engine launcher. And then we have content, and then we have content examples right there for you to pull down and use, okay? Someone said, Chris, any tips in the meantime? There is no meantime, this is working. Okay, so let's look at some of the examples in Pivot Painter. So the first of these is actually reasonably straightforward. You see how the leaves here are kind of moving back and forth? So the reason those leaves are moving back and forth is because in Pivot Painter, it's actually baked out where the branches are and where the leaves are. And it actually tells it to move more the further along the tree you are. And because it's the further along the tree you are, you get more of this push, whereas the trunk doesn't quite move around as much, which kind of creates a really interesting visual. Now, if we would look over here and see a much softer representation of that, we can see that this tree is kind of just only barely moving. But again, it just kind of adds that nice little element of semi-realism to the scene that I think is really, really good. And don't forget, you can open up any of these materials and examine them and pull them apart and do whatever it is you want to do with them and use them in your own projects. So please keep that in mind, because you can definitely up the visual fidelity of some of these projects. Someone said, how heavy is this on the GPU? It's going to get more or less expensive depending on the number of verts in the object, but it's generally not too expensive. Waiting for a solar system cyclone. I make solar system cyclone one time. If we look at the effects here, we can see some other good examples. So this is that same tree system, but being done on kind of a simpler mesh. So you can see that as the hierarchy extends, there's more and more movement between these areas. And if we move over to here, we could do other things too, right? Like we could dynamically scale these elements as they move along the hierarchy. Again, this is all just material, and this is a 3ds Max script that you can use. I believe someone on the forums has made a Houdini script to do the same thing, if Houdini is more of your jam. Now, here's a really cool one, same kind of effect. This is, once again, this is actually one single mesh. but it's dynamically building itself because they baked out a texture that actually just had each block as a unique color, and the script just automatically goes through and reconstructs it block by block by block by block. So like you can create some really, really cool visual effects that could be directly tied to a scalar parameter that you may not have previously considered were usable. So I really wanted to make sure that folks were aware that this environment existed, and some of the advantages in doing so. So with that done, the next thing I would like to do is a little bit of a strange one, but I think it's pretty cool. All right, so let's pretend you're working on a project and it requires you to have a building. Okay, if you want to have some sort of like large building, how are we going to do it? So there's a really cool little thing you can do called interior mapping. I'm going to open this up. Sorry, I've turned off my screen while I quickly just find the assets to import. One moment, folks. Cool. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've skipped a step here. I know I generally don't really skip too many steps in these projects, but I have I've gone ahead and I've skipped a step. This is a really, really easy thing for you to do yourself, but I've imported a cube map texture, which you can actually take yourself. So see this, it's actually a 360 image. If you ever want to take these yourself, you can actually do this by adding a scene capture cube map. But I've gone into another environment and I've added this already. So what I wanted to show you next was this. Okay, if I go to my content browser, I create a new material that's just called m_interior map. If I open this up and I add, there's a node called interior cube map. Okay, I'm going to get this cube map and I'm going to drag it in. Again, this is literally just a 360 image of my own environment elsewhere. I want you to look at what we see. I'm just going to drag this onto the box. Now, see that? Now this room doesn't actually exist. Okay, this room does not exist. I can't stress it enough. This is getting a 360-degree image and projecting it as a cube and then tiling it accordingly. Okay, now the cool part is like tiling is just a value here. It's told to do 4x4, and I can see that we've got 4x4. So you know, if I wanted to, I can go to here and say I want the tiling to be a value of 1. All right, so you know this is kind of cool, but the problem is like if I wanted this to be my building and I wanted to have a giant building, this gets creepy real quick. Notice that as I make this bigger, we've got this going on, which just looks strange. Okay, so let's consider what we could do, like what the desired result is in this situation. For me, I believe the desired result of what we would love to have here is I would love it that as we made this cube bigger, it added rooms, because that just sounds really cool. So I'm actually going to import another static mesh. And the other static mesh is just a cube with a pivot position in a slightly different location. This is just going to make it easier for me to demonstrate everything. Notice I have this one called simple cube. If I set the current cube as a simple cube, the pivot point is just in the bottom center. The reason I like this is because now I can just compress this and kind of scale it accordingly. See? All right. So I said I wanted to automatically change the size of this room. How would one go about doing that? That sounds pretty intense. Fortunately, it's not as difficult as it sounds. The trick is to use some of the techniques that we've actually already used today. So if you were to go through here, think about what we really want to do. What we really want to do is we want to look at the size of any side that we're looking at, and we want to say to it, how big is that side? And then we want to multiply the tiling amount by the size of that side. So to do that, first off, we have to find some way of determining which side is which fortunately is easy, because I can once again say, tell me the vertex normal, which tells me this side is the X side, this is the Y side, this is the blue side. Okay? Now, the next thing for me to do, now that we've got this information, is I need to get this in local space, because I need this to always be the same value whenever I turn it around. Because what would happen if I plug this into here? If I rotate it, see how it's kind of doing some weird stuff there? It's doing something strange because it's giving me the value that they're pointing in world space, but I need them to kind of remember which way up was relative to themselves. Someone said, wait, X, Y, and blue. Sorry, red, green, and blue, X, Y, and Z. So the good news is we can do that really easily. So I can just say transform. Transform from world space to local space. And what this does is says, get a direction, but this time give me the direction in local space. Now again, I know this is probably going to be flying over some people's heads, but it's why it was important to me that we kind of had this session, because I wanted folks to just be aware that some of the things that seem like wizardry are definitely achievable. Okay. So we've got this, okay, and that's now telling me which direction is which. Now the other really important node to making this work is this one. I need to go back to here, and what I need to do is say to it, well, how big are you? Like, what scale are you at any point? And fortunately, there's a great node called object scale. And this actually tells me how big it is on the x-axis, how big it is on the y-axis, and how big it is on the z-axis. And this is actually the major part of the solution to this entire problem. Last little thing I'm going to do here is, this is the x-axis, but this is also the x-axis. So I'm going to run an abs function, which will now mean that blue, blue, green, green, red, red, because any negatives are now positive, okay? Okay, cool. So all I actually need to do is I need to tell this thing, all right, let's get the red channel, okay? And what I'm going to tell it is, let's get the red channel, which looks like this. White, white, and everything else is black. Because if it's not red, it's nothing there, so it's black, okay? So what I actually need to do is I need to tell it, if you are red, your scale is equal to, I want to tile the x-axis by the y scale. Not append many. And the y-axis by the z scale, if you're red. And then I just do the same thing for the other channel. So if I say this to this thing, hey, if you're green, if you are green, I want you to be, let's look at the axes. If we're looking down the green axis, which is this y value, x is x and z is y. And finally, the only option left, if neither of these, is going to be z, which I believe is just x and y. Maybe. This is the axes that I always mess up. Cool. And in theory, these values will now change depending on which direction that I'm looking. And all I should have to do is multiply them against texture coordinates. I didn't actually plug anything in. That was a good trick. Cool. That's a good sign. As I make it bigger, it's now adding extra rooms. Oh, I definitely got this one wrong. It looks like my trying to figure out which values I've mixed up on this one. It looks like on my x-axis, sorry folks, be one moment, just trying to work out which one I've made a slight mistake on. It looks like when looking down the x-axis, left is y and up is x. So when looking down the x-axis, which is red, yeah, I see what it did. Y, Z. Fixed. Up top doesn't really matter because it's kind of doing a strange projection anyway. That's okay. Oh. My y-axis is correct. Sorry folks, I don't know how I've managed to mess this one up, but I sure have. Whenever it's green, it's X and Z. Whenever it's red, it's Y and Z. Alright. I've made a slight mistake, but I can't quite pick up where it is. Alex, I don't suppose you happen to be seeing this one anywhere?
Not currently.
Okay. Okay, actually one little thing to fix. Ah, I think I see what it is. I think I'm actually getting a slight blend of the vertex coming in from here. I think I need to normalize it. I think all of my math was correct, but I'm somehow not getting a value between 0 and 1. So when I abs it, we're getting something strange. Fixed. 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 All right. Yeah, cool. I was like, this is strange. There's one axis contributing that shouldn't be. I didn't normalize the transformation that I made. So for anyone wondering what just happened, this wasn't a perfect transform from world space to local space. I needed to give it a slightly more accurate direction by normalizing it so that it was a value between 0 and 1. Again, like today was less about showing you exactly how to do this and more about exposing you to concepts that you knew would save you time in the future moving forward. Someone's just said that they've lost stream. Is everything still running on your end?
Yeah, it's still good on my end,
okay.
but there has been a couple of dropouts.
Oh, okay. My apologies. It must be, could have been that hail that came through just as this entire session started. Okay, cool. So we've got the basics of that kind of set up, which is now correctly working. And again, the cool part here is, you know, we can get this, and we can make this as big as we needed to, which is really useful. Another really nice little thing that we can do is right now it's making a room halfway through. Like, see that weird result that we're getting there? Nothing stops us from that final value that we're multiplying everything by. If we wanted to run a round function, we run the round function, it will actually squish the rooms. I want you to pay attention to this wall in the middle and watch what it does as I shrink it. It's actually always going to have full rooms now. It might be easiest to see here. So it actually stretch a couple of the rooms to compensate and then just pop it in. Cool. So we can see that this is now working. We can see like some of the advantages of this because, like, you know, someone's asked here, like, can we randomize between two texture samples? We can, but another really useful thing that's built into this out of the box is this value called randomize rotations. If we set that to be true, it's now actually just going to randomize the direction of the room to be, and obviously this is a bad idea if your room has a window in it, which in hindsight probably shouldn't have captured. But what we're actually seeing here is it's kind of shuffling them all around. So it's much harder to tell that it's the same cube map being used again and again and again. And it's not hard for us to get an effect like this and to apply extra steps to it, right? So it's not hard for us to get an effect like this and say we wanted to, you know, get some masks. I could comfortably just drag in some of these masks. I can't remember which ones here are good, so I'm gonna just drag them all in. So give this in just a sec. I can see that if I wanted to, there you go. So here's this mask texture. Nothing would stop me from getting these two textures. And in my interior map, using them, again with the exact same info that we saw a moment ago. Sorry, from here. Which will watch what happens when we bring in our other textures. Now this map is just a mask map where each color represents a different what do you call it? A different like channel that would be on a building facade. I think the alpha represents the windows themselves. Yeah, it does. So what I actually could do here quite comfortably is I could say, hey, whenever you are a white value, I want you to be the interior. And whenever you are the black value, I could say I want it to be, I don't know, this concrete texture. Let's just go with that. Just purely for the sake of demonstration. Okay. And if I was to hit stop and examine what this says, what we end up with is a building with an exterior that I can kind of peek in the windows and see that there's something up. You know, and again, I can kind of get this, and it'll comfortably just add the windows that I need. You know, so my point is, you know, if you've got a building that's this large, you can still do the area, you can still do, oops, sorry, the area beneath it manually. Like, there's nothing that stops you from doing, like, getting this, and that's weird. Why is it popping out over there? Getting a bit of a strange result that I've never seen before. Have you ever seen that? Anyway.
Probably got a little bit of lag, so...
For some reason, whenever I drag the scale down, I got a bit of a strange result. So my point is like, if we wanted to, we could use vertex blending to say, hey, make the roof an actual roof. So we could easily just turn off the windows here as we saw fit. We could grab this here, getting some precision point issues, which you can resolve pretty easily. It's because I put that round function in, which is an HLSL round, which means I gotta add like the world's smallest number so that it doesn't do something strange. There you go. Let's not ask questions. So anyway, my point is if you wanted to, you could still do the bottom part of your buildings and towers as a custom design. You know, like this could all be custom meshed out, but when we're talking about the areas that people are just going to be kind of breezing past with like a camera that's flying down this way, nothing would stop you from kind of just having just boilerplate extra stuff up top that no one has to really know about. You know what I mean? Like, it still looks reasonable, and if you were to cover this in staircases and air conditioners and a few other just bits and pieces of just junk on the outside, no one would realize what was going on. And you know, when I'm able to, on a city street, just grab this and be like, all right, we need another building, but this one's gonna be like, psh. You know, when I can comfortably just kind of smash these things out and not really think about it, it's just much easier for blocking out your initial space and getting everything set up as appropriate. So I really wanted to show you that some of these effects are not as scary as you may have had. Someone said, random question but relevant, if I'm getting flicking in my viewport from particles or textures, what are some things I should check to fix them? That kind of depends, but often it means you're getting clipping. If two things are in the exact same space, facing the exact same direction, the engine's going to get a little bit confused about which one of those things to show. So you may want to fix your, just move one of them 1 centimeter upwards. It kind of depends on the kind of issue you're facing. The bug that I just came across that I fixed without really explaining what I was doing was rounding in rounding on a GPU can sometimes be a little bit. You can have some issues due to what's called floating point precision. Basically, whenever a value is 0.5, it's meant to round up. But whenever a value is 0.49999999999, it's meant to round down. Due to floating point precision, and that is to say that due to GPUs being a little bit fuzzy in how they store those numbers and pass them around, what I actually did was a bit cheeky, and I always add 0.00001 so that the round function within like a reasonable margin of slipping is always going to round upwards instead of up and then down and then up and then down. Someone said, could you lerp between cube maps based on day-night cycle or add a light source from the sun to the interior? Yeah, for sure. I've actually done that myself. Nothing stops you from kind of doing a bit of a box shadow projection onto the inside based on the direction of the light. And effects like that are really, really valuable. So if you want to take a stab at that, by all means, please do. Because it really does help kind of seal the deal for certain kind of effects. For things like this as well, like it's funny how just if I was to make this scene look like it was nighttime, a lot of what we're seeing, if you light them up randomly, that's actually not that hard to do either. And this light that we've got in there is kind of an ambient light, so you can see that because it's plugged into that emissive channel, it's still holding up pretty well. Sorry, it's plugged into the base channel, but if I plug this into the emissive channel, we would see this. Oh, that's wrong. That's definitely wrong. Don't judge me for what just happened. Sorry. I want to get this and this. And plug that into emissive. And we can kind of see it's a little bit brighter on the inside there. And if we wanted to, you could easily get the current coordinate that you're looking at and kind of randomize the color for each room within a small threshold, just to make sure that they look like they have varying levels of brightness. Like that kind of situation is actually surprisingly straightforward to do. So yeah, please definitely consider adding little bits and pieces like that. Great. How are we doing for time? 3:25. All right. I think I might make a giant laser. Yeah, lasers. Okay. So the next thing I would like to do is I would like to. First, I'm just going to quickly put the sun back in its place. Just reset you to defaults. Great. All right. Reset the time of day. Everything's fine again. I would like to get a giant laser and just rip through this entire environment. Okay. I've had enough of it. Let's just ditch it. So, what I would like to do is basically have some sort of thing in the world that's able to paint a certain level of like death and destruction through our otherwise serene grassy field. Push this back because it's kind of weirding me out. Okay, so I would like to have something that I could just drag through this environment and in its wake leave just like fire and or brimstone. So how do we go and approach this problem? So we approach this problem with Blueprint, Unreal Engine's visual scripting language. We right click and I'm going to create a new Blueprint class. And I'm going to call this BP giant laser. I really like that there's this one excited icon that is like flying up and down in the corner of my eye. So I've created a BP giant laser and I'm just going to add a couple of things to it. And I actually prepped some of these little bits and pieces earlier. First thing that my giant laser needs is a giant laser. I made one of them. It needs the compile shaders, so we'll just give that a second. But while that's kind of making its giant laser, the next thing that I'm going to need is I'm going to need to make sure there's like an appropriate level of like lava at the bottom of my material, I guess. So we'll give this just a second to complete. Someone said, is it pushing it too far to make interior windows or doors, or would that need geometry to achieve? You could potentially achieve an effect like that. It really depends on how expensive you're willing the core thing to really be. But, you know, you could also run Blueprint over the top of that cube to add those bits and pieces automatically yourself pretty comfortably. Anyway, death lasers. So we've got this, and I'm just going to drag it into the world so we can see it. And we can now see that we have a giant orbital laser doing what giant orbital lasers do. But I would like to make sure that the bottom isn't doing this. Because, you know, like, what is this? Amateur hour? So I'm going to add a static mesh that is called Lava Blob. Lava Blob is really similar to the material that I showed you earlier, actually. Remember that we had that pulsing heart rock going on? This is really weird to say out loud sometimes, but remember we had that large like pulsing heart rock that we had earlier? Lava Blob's actually doing the same thing, except it's doing it from the bottom upwards. So I'm going to make it really big so you can see it. So it's actually the same kind of logic, it's just pulsing out only in some areas, which results in this kind of cool looking effect. Obviously that's a bit too big for our Lava Blob. I'd like it to... Yeah, that looks alright. Great. And I'm going to make sure that our... I mean, in hindsight, I probably should have gone a bit bigger, but whatever. It's okay. Great. So we've got this going on. And, you know, I mean, if we wanted to, we could add all sorts of lights and bells and whistles to it. I'm not really too concerned about that side of things today. This is just it was a quick beam that I threw together. Okay, so I want this painting destruction through my landscape, okay? And this is where we start to look at a concept called render targets, because a render target is a way of painting things dynamically using our own, like, you kind of basically imagine it was painting with your computer, no Photoshop. This will make more sense in a second. So what I'm actually going to do is, if you think about when you paint things, how we paint things, we need to have a few things. We need to have a brush. We need to have a brush. We need to have a canvas, and we need to have some way to kind of move that brush over that canvas. Okay. Now, what I'm about to do, it's worth noting, is actually available in a limited capacity inside of the content examples. So I'm just going to quickly open this one up for you, just in background, just so that you are aware that there is a reference point to what it is that I'm making. Just one moment. Okay. So if you are looking to do this yourself, you can open the area called Blueprint Render to Target, okay? And this will actually walk you through how to create the effect that we're about to create. So please just keep in mind that even though what I'm about to show you is an advanced effect, there is actually a version of it to some extent that you can open yourself here. Now, the first thing that I need to do is create some sort of brush, which means what I actually need to do is I need to have a material that basically gets saved out as a texture. So to do that, I need to create a new material that I'm going to call m_rt, no, m_brush. Okay. And this is going to be a reasonably straightforward material. Again, it's worth noting that if you want to create this yourself, this is totally available in here. and you can access any of the things that you're trying to create, including this brush that I'm about to create, which is just here. So yeah, I do want to stress that like I'm not just kind of like throwing this together as arbitrarily. Like you can kind of suss this out where you see fit. Okay. Whoop. Wow, I managed to just crash 2 versions of Unreal at the same time. That is a new high score. One moment. Oh wait, nope. I only crashed the content examples. Someone said, where is here? Here is in the content examples project. The project that I've kind of popped open a couple of times now. It's available in the Learn tab, so you can kind of go through that one. It's not in any kind of strange place. It's just in that one. You can open up a level called Blueprint to Render Target. Cool. So what I'm actually going to do is just set up a couple of parameters. I need to be able to get a location. I need to look at that location, and I need to find the distance from that location. Here we go. So I've gotten a texture coordinate, which is just UVs that run diagonally, like X, Y. And I'm getting the distance from any point, which means if I was to tell this thing that its location is, say, 0.5, 0.5, it would now give me a dot in the middle of the screen, which is what we want. Now I want to flip that, and while that may not look like it's working, that actually is. Because the other thing I want to do is I want to have a value called size. Also, it's been quite a while since I've done this demo that I'm doing right now, so my apologies. I want to get U divided by Alright, sorry folks, that'll be one moment. Just handling a crash. OBS kind of kicks in sometimes. Sorry folks, we'll just be one moment while it just recovers. What did I lose? I lost the brush material. So I'm just going to quickly catch up to where we were a second ago. Okay. Sorry folks, just quickly catching up to where we were. I think I want to A minus B that, don't I? Where this value is going to be equal to force strength. Sorry, force size. This one is. Sorry about this, folks. Let me just one minute. I got a bit frazzled, I think, from the project crashing. I've just lost my train of thought. Just want to quickly look at a note to make sure that I'm still able to set this one up. My apologies. In the meantime, are there any questions that we want to field just while I quickly am correcting this brush logic? Again, you can pull this brush directly from the content examples if you would like to do so. Okay, no questions popping up, so I guess I'll just kind of power ahead. So someone's someone said, "Can you work with me on my pitch?" Not directly, but I'm happy to discuss a pitch. The problem that I just had just then, this was actually correct. What I forgot was to use a value below. So I get U divided by U. So yeah, I'm more than happy to discuss certain pitches. If you're interested in like the viability of something, by all means, let me know, and I'm happy to have that conversation as we see fit. But yeah, I mean it's really up to you about how, like, there's only so much I can help, I should say. So please let me know what's going to be useful. What was the next question? Can you save this material in a save game object? That's a good question. Alex, do you know about that? Can you cache a render target to a save game object?
Yeah, you should be able to. I don't know if it's able to be done through blueprints, sorry, but it might be in the render target blueprint library, maybe.
Okay. Cool. Sorry, I'm just looking back to this so you can still see my screen. Okay, so I'll just keep explaining what I've got here. My apologies for this. This taken a little while. It's been quite a while since I've made anything like this, so I got a bit, after the crash happened, I got a little bit frazzled with what I was doing. Yay, live sessions. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to have some sort of value that's being read in called like force power. Okay, now literally, I know this looks like a super advanced thing, but really all it's doing is this material gets given a location and it has the ability to shrink the size of this circle or make it really big. This is going to be way too big. But so it's just kind of making this thing bigger and smaller. Okay, so by doing it this way, what I'm actually able to do is I'm going to be able to draw this to a texture that becomes the painted version of our destruction. Now, because of this, I can set a few boxes. Like I can tell this thing to ignore lighting. I'll set this up to opaque. So there's a few things I can just kind of quickly turn off. But that's all we need to do for the overall value here, I believe. Probably should have clamped something somewhere, but we'll see how that goes in a second. Great. And I'm going to go back into my giant laser. And I'm going to set everything up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell this thing that when the environment begins, I want it to go ahead and create a dynamic material instance. So what this means is when the world begins, I want it to create a brush material, the one that I just created, and I want it to save it as something that we're going to call brush. So this means that it's kind of like creating like a version of that material that it can change any of these variables that it sees fit. Now, with that created, the next thing for me to do is to have an event that is going to be called draw at location. And this is going to paint my brush onto the world. So what I want you to do for just a second is I'm going to roll back for just a moment, and I'm going to look at this landscape that we've got. I'm going to pull the camera all the way back to here, okay? Now what I want you to picture for just a second is if our landscape, if we wanted to draw something across it, if we imagined that this square was the canvas that we're drawing to, how would we project something to it? And the answer is actually reasonably straightforward. If I was to open up the landscape material that we have, that we've been using this whole time. Now, some of you may think that the way to do it would be to just set a value, right? You know, I want to set the base color to something. But the problem is that's not going to work particularly well, because if we try to do that, I want you to look at what happens. If I just plug a color into this thing, what we see is this. So I've just gotten a logo. Give it just a second. And what we're actually seeing beneath the Unreal logos, sorry, beneath the grass, is the logo itself doesn't encompass the entire environment. I need a logo that stretches all the way from this corner to this corner. Now, fortunately, if you know how big something is, which you can measure using the in-engine ruler by just dragging the middle mouse button, if we know how big something is going this way, and we know how big it is going this way, we can actually do it, we can reproject it by saying, hey, find out where you are in the world, and then just divide your position by the size of those corners. Now, fortunately, I know the size already. I know the size is 50,400. And again, like, I know I'm skipping through a lot of stuff today, but the aim here is more to just show you the kind of stuff that is doable and where things work. Okay, give this just a second. So I've just hard coded this in with now getting the position and dividing it by 50,400. Now the reason excuse me, the reason I've done this is because, just to clarify, if you assume that this position here is 0, 0, and you assume that this position here is 50,400, 50,400, because that's how big it is, by dividing every value here by 50,400, you've now got 0, 0 and 1, 1. Okay? And if we come back to this, we can see that that logo is now stretching the whole way across. And that's what our canvas is going to do. So the next thing we need to do is we need a texture to actually save everything to. And that's going to be a dynamic texture, or as we call them, a render target. So I'm going to create an RT, which I'm going to call RT destruction. And I'm going to set this to be something big, 1024 by 1024. And I'm going to go to my landscape, and I'm just going to plug this in, and you can now see that this black texture that we just created is now being sampled inside the landscape. So the last thing I need to do is figure out how to draw to it. And to do that, there's a function called draw material to render target. And what this does is this takes a material, such as our brush, and it renders it to a render target. So it literally just does that thing. Okay? And if I wanted to, what I'm going to do is I'm just in tick going to say draw this this function we just made. Now when I run the game and I hit simulate, we can actually see that that's working. See that painted this sphere to us? This like circle? Now, the problem we have is that this currently isn't actually taking in any information about where it is in the world. But in the same way that we know that that's 50,400, and that's 0, 0, we can do the same thing with our material. So inside of my giant laser, before I draw it, I can now say, get the brush, set the vector parameter, to be my location divided by 50,400. I'm going to promote that to a variable called world size, just so I don't have to keep saying 50,400. What did I call it? Did I call it force location or something like that? I think it was force location. Cool. And we can see that's working, because if I was to get my giant laser and move it around, it's now painting a circle that's moving. The next thing is to follow that same logic through. All right, so we know that the force's location is being set that way. So let's also set a value for force size, which is, once again, we get the brush. And again, folks, keep in mind, I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. So like, don't be like, if you don't get it immediately, don't think that, you know, there's an issue there. It's just I've got a lot of practice. Clearly not always enough. Let's go 1024 divided by world size. I think I called it world force size, didn't I? Yes, I did. So now if I zoom in on my giant laser, I'm going to hide the grass while we're doing the rest of what we're doing. I can now see that it's painting this circle beneath it, okay? So now the last part is I need this circle to stay behind as I draw. And a really cool thing is that if you were to get that brush and set it to be additive, it actually keeps the information that was there previously. So if I hit go, I'm now able to kind of just draw into the world. Okay. Which is useful. The other thing that I wanted to do was, I think I called it force strength or something like that. Was it force strength? This is all sounding way more Star Wars than I intended. Force power. So I'm just going to set the, I'm going to tell it to, you know, only paint as long as it's been since you last checked, which is going to be, I don't know, times by 10. And now we should end up with a softer, yeah, much softer as it kind of moves around. Okay, great. Cool. So we can now see that we're kind of starting to paint things in. Everything's kind of generally working. I would like to reset the destruction every time we start this again. So I'm going to add a thing in here called clear render target, which will literally take a render target and just empty it. So now when I hit play, the other stuff goes. I can do whatever I need. And then when I hit stop and play, it'll all reset. Okay. Now, going back to all of this stuff that we had before, I've actually gone ahead and I've made ahead of time another material function that is literally just the destroyed charred ground. So I've actually gone ahead and I've made a material function that says tell me, like, sorry, I've made a material function that says this is what destroyed ground looks like. And if I drag this in, sorry, forgot I actually added UV support to this. If I drag this single material function in, it wants to know how big it is, so I'm just going to tell it. But it needs to know, it's got a lava height value, but otherwise it just needs to know when to show this destruction. And what we do is, quite simply, we say the same thing that we've been doing this whole time, which is whenever the value is black, we want to show the ground. Whenever the value is white, we want to show the destroyed ground. I'll plug this in. Now, I still need to set up the lava height. So this is going to look a little bit strange. Yeah, just a second. Might not be realistic, but could you also lower up the grass color to black at the edge of the destruction, but over time rather than just at the moment it hits? You could. There's a couple of different ways to approach that problem. What I would actually suggest is having a much bigger gradient than what anyone sees, so it starts to become black as it gets closer, which would create a similar kind of effect. Now, I didn't set the lava height, so the lava height is turning itself on and off and on and off, but we can now see at least that as I paint into the world, we're now able to paint general destruction into the world. So the next thing is to fix this lava height so that it correctly responds to the world. Now, oh, by the way, you can see that this is the texture that we're making here, so it's painting straight in. Now, to do the lava heights, if you think about it, when the lava is... We want to make it so that destruction gets painted in from a value of 0 to 0.5, and lava gets painted in whenever this value goes between 0.5 and 1. That way, whenever it's on the outskirts, it goes darker, but whenever it's on the inside, it's lava. So to do something like that involves us getting this destruction and saying to it, if you think about the need to get values that are from 0 to 0.5 and make them now equal to make them now, I'm going to start that sentence again. If you think about the need to get values that are from 0 to 0.5 and changing them to go from 0 to 1, all you're doing is multiplying them by 2, because 0.5 is now 1. Okay, so I'm literally just going to multiply this value by 2, which gets me a longer blend. However, if you think about the lava height needing to go up, and it's only doing it from values that are 0.5 to, and I want to saturate that as well, so it doesn't go above 1. If you think about getting the lava height and needing to have the values that go from 0.5 to 1, it's almost the exact same thing, except we subtract 0.5 first, which means that we now have values that go from negative 0.5 to 0.5. When we times that by 2, we now have values that go from negative 1 to 1. When we clamp it or saturate it, we now have values that go from 0 to 1. And I know that was a lot of math that I just threw at you. But again, okay, we give this just a second. We need elevated music for this stream for next time, I think. Just whenever we're doing compile shaders on an advanced landscape, can set the mood properly.
Shall I jump in and offer my assistance?
I'd be afraid of violating copyright. All right, there we go. So if we look at what this looks like, we have destruction. Whenever our beam moves around, it's now painting that destruction behind it. This is really cool. I like my job. So you can see that we're now getting that crisp layer on the outside, while on the inside we're kind of getting this more of a generic lava-y look. Another thing that I would like to do here is I would like to be able to have the grass visible. So if I get the grass right now, we have really grassy lava, which is awkward. But thankfully, everything's just reading off the same textures. So if I was to go ahead and get these values and just copy them into the grass shader wholesale, it's huge material. We look at this and all you need to do is go, nope. Because if you think about it, right now white means we want grass and white means we don't want grass and black means we do want grass. So if I get this current value that we've got and I do 1 minus, that's now going to be it's now going to be a black dot instead of a white dot. And I can just ignore everything that I'm seeing here and multiply the final output of the opacity mask and back away slowly. Can we add displacement for it to affect the landscape geometry? You can run this through the tessellation pass to lift it up towards the edges or lower it, I guess, in the middle would be probably what you wanted to do. Give it just a sec. Alright, my flowers are still immune to lava, but you can see here that my grass now can no longer go on the lava. And if I hit go, we grabbed it, we pulled it this way, it's clearing out that geometry the whole way through. So I'm just going to quickly drop this into the heathering that's going on. "50-50 chance of it being this one or this one." And I'm just going to copy this logic that we had out of one and into the other wholesale. Once again, I'm not even going to look at the material. It's going to be too nasty. Oof. Someone said, could that affect a nav mesh too? If you wanted to start getting into the aspects of affecting the nav mesh, you might have to take a slightly more, like a different approach that would involve you kind of actually creating some sort of collision that was in that region.
Yeah, I can actually talk about that. But it might not be
This is the wrong stream. If you want to ping Alex about it later, by all means do. But I suspect dynamically running compute shaders to do this whole thing is probably outside of standard film and TV usage. Honestly, this effect in hindsight was probably a bit more advanced than I had intended. So you can see here, we're now able to kind of paint out the destruction. And we could slow the whole effect down as well if we wanted to. So I could get my BP giant laser. And where I'm currently timesing it by 10, I could just dial that back. Actually, that looks way better. So now we kind of get that lava spreading over time. Cool aspect is because it's working off the render targets, they're going to join one another. You see that? Which I think is very cool. Great. Someone said, could that set of nodes you're copying and pasting into be turned into a function instead? Yes. I feel suddenly ashamed of what I just showed you. Someone said, has the audio gone very quiet? Can't tell you that one myself, but hopefully it's okay. If you want, I can turn up my sensitivity on the microphone. So someone said, sorry if this is dumb, but say you were making a shot of this laser ripping through the world. You do all this and then capture it in sequencer. Yes, you could potentially do this and then capture it in sequencer if you wanted to. That would be a way to do it. Any other questions that are coming up? There's a whole lot of rage about notifications. All right. Cool. Well, we're at the 2 hour mark. It's kind of the main stuff that I wanted to go through. I think the next time I run this session, I'm going to add some extra content into it, and I'm going to do this section in a cleaner way. So my apologies to folks today. We kind of had a couple of hiccups there, which a little embarrassing. Hopefully this was generally okay. I'm going to switch over now to the group chat. Just so that we've got everyone involved. So give me just 1 moment. Alex, you're around. One of these days I'm going to learn how to properly go full screen on this camera without it being problematic. There we go. And Tony's around? Great.
I think he was actually in a call. No, I was. I'm good.
Okay, so we've got Tony and Alex and myself here again for the Q&A section. Again, I know there were some hiccups, but hopefully that was generally showing you the kind of just concepts of just things you could do outside of particles and some of the more advanced stuff. So if you have any questions about the program in general, about stuff that's potentially like other aspects of Unreal, any general discussion, now's the time to have it, because if anyone's going to be able to answer it, hopefully it's the three of us. Otherwise we're in trouble. But that's not true. There's also some things that are specific to certain states and territories, film departments, I guess. So if you have any questions, please feel free to bring them up now. Let's have a bit of a discussion going on. It's also worth noting, again, if you did miss any sessions, while we have replays, we're doing all of the sessions live again over the rest of this week. So starting tonight, we have interior environments, and then we move on through the rest of the sessions. So if you have missed any, but you still want to be able to ask questions and be like, hey, how does this work? Or what happens here? By all means, please feel free to re-attend some of these sessions. I'm not going to be like, look at this person attending the same session twice. You're more than welcome, and they're going to be slightly different because it's a live build. What I intend to make versus what I actually make are like similar at best. So hopefully that's hopefully some of you are still there. Who would be the best person to email regarding the applications process? I have some concerns I'd like to inquire about privately. I don't think it's appropriate to bring up here necessarily. So if you've got some inquiries regarding the applications process, I guess it kind of depends where those issues are. Tony, do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, it does. It's a tough one to say because you want to bring it up privately. You know what? Probably ping the sfc-nz at epicgames.com group. I'll respond to you.
Great.
And we'll go from there.
Cool. I think. I mean, if there are some of these, the main thing to keep in mind is there are kind of two avenues to go through. Two avenues that you have to be able to pass through. One is there's the Epic's criteria, and then of course there's your regional criteria. So if the terms that you're reading are on our website, everything seems fine. You still may need to consult your appropriate state or territory conditions. But Tony is happy to kind of clarify some of those points through the core email address. Alex, do you want to type in the email address for the?
Yep.
Do you want to give it some regex though, so that bots don't pick up on the chat? It's the last thing we do.
Oh yes, actually.
Yeah, some square brackets on that at. What else have we got here? Can you use 4.26 beta for the contest? I'd say that's totally fine. I mean, it's not necessarily going to be the most stable branch, but 4.26 has a lot of features in it that awkwardly have just missed out on 4.25. So for anyone that's curious about some of the features in 4.26, the next build of Unreal, It has like drag and drop cloud creation that gives you full volumetric dynamic clouds. It's got a great system for rivers. It's got a great system for oceans and lakes. It's got some other good stuff. You're probably in a better situation to potentially use. You're probably in a better situation to potentially use 4.26 than a games team might be, because there's kind of less that can break in film and TV compared to a full dynamic system that's like, I don't know, some sort of 100-player battle royale game or something. So like, you may be in an okay situation. I can't recall if there's any new audio features in 4.26, but we could pull down the roadmap that's public. There is, here it is. I got it just here. So if you're curious about what's coming down the road and like what's actually in the next version, that link that I just linked to is to a Trello board. And we add stuff as it gets done for the next version. So 4.26 has Chaos, has physics parity, so a new physics engine. So you can do a lot more destruction and things like that. There is a DMX plugin, which could be useful for some folks here. Looking for anything to do with audio specifically that was requested. Can't see anything offhand, but there may be. So, yeah, you're more than welcome to kind of consult that list and see if you think that that's a good move. It's also worth noting that, like, we're on 4.25 right now. You're submitting for applications at the end of August, and then there's the whole approval process. So by the time you actually officially start production, there's a good chance that 2.6 will be in a much more mature state. So you may actually be in a better situation as that comes. Yeah, like there's you may be able to hold off, because it's worth noting that switching from 4.25 to 4.26 is likely going to be a pretty straightforward process for most teams here. There's not going to be any C++ code or very little C++ code that could potentially have issues. So it should, asterisk, be pretty straightforward. So there's nothing wrong with building it now, and then as the production continues and matures, looking at what you would want to do. Someone said, do you need to compile 4.26 from source? If you want to get any sort of build before it's officially out, then yeah, you do. So it definitely adds a layer of complexity. There's a question there regarding screen Vic. I guess that's film Vic. Yeah. I can't answer that one myself.
Yeah, I mean, we get it, and this is something we have no control over. To the points we've raised several times, you need to be safe when doing this. Please don't take unnecessary risks. We completely understand you might not be able to get out in film if that was your intention. If you're doing animation, it's obviously going to be a little bit easier for you. But please do not take any risks for this one. Let's just work on the premise that we'll have another one in the future, and you can do the thing you're planning to do today then. But yeah, again, don't risk it. It's honestly, it's not worth it.
Someone said, will you be doing any other film or competitions or training in the future? So I'd say that generally this was pretty successful, even if the training is not as part of like this competition or anything like that. There's a good chance that we will have additional sessions that we'll do our best to kind of publicly broadcast. So like there will likely be additional webinars in the ANZ time zone moving forward. Historically, pre-pandemic, I was doing them live, like in person. So us being able to move over to a webinar format is actually pretty exciting. So being able to run some more of that would be great. It's also worth noting that, as we get feedback from everyone, like this entire first week was the first time we've run training for this group of people. Sorry, let me rephrase. It's the first time that the ANZ team have run training for this group of people. So because I haven't really done any training for film and television specifically before, there was definitely information that was new to me that I didn't realize we should be covering as thoroughly, and there was definitely information that folks here were just totally comfortable with. Like, I seemed like when I showed everyone sequencer here, they were like, yep, this makes sense. And I was like, oh, okay, I thought this was very cool. There's that difference in audience from what I'm used to, but what I'm getting at is there's a good chance that we may add additional add additional talks over the course of the both this early section, but or potentially later down the track when it comes to the actual production, depending on where we like what kind of feedback we're getting from folks. So if you feel like there are some topics that have been like big concerns that are currently huge unknowns, and you're not sure if your team could take them on, we'd love to hear your feedback, because that's going to help us determine if something is important for us to actually do an extra session on. It's going to be important for us to just work out how we can best move with all of the other teams kind of moving forward. What else have we got? As a filmmaker, everything you've done so far makes sense and is working fine. Yes. So someone's brought up UE live action matting. I've had a couple of folks bring that up, and I'll see what we can do, but I can't guarantee anything on that one. Worst case scenarios, we may update the docs that we've been linking to just alert people to certain topics that have come up, but I'll see if there's someone that's a bit more knowledgeable in that department that could give a lesson in, because that one is so strongly film and TV that Alex and myself don't have experience with it directly, so I wouldn't want to run a live tutorial that was just us repeating someone else's information. It's coming from a genuine place of knowledge, I think, is important for these sessions. Otherwise, you might as well be catching YouTube videos for some of these things. So trying to find the right resource for that is pretty important. What else have we had come up?
Groom tutorials.
Groom tutorials. Groom is like the one thing that... It's the coolest feature that I've yet to work with. I'm sorry. Ever since Groom came out, like my workload's been pretty high, so I haven't had a chance to just make Cousin It or the nearest non-copyright stepping on equivalent, because that sounds like a lot of fun. I just haven't had the ability to do so. Cute dog. All right.
Actually, I might just put that in my list of things. We might just ask the team and see if we can do something special.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
We'll just talk to the US and see if we can organize something on Groom the next week.
Is there any expectation of whether films should be animation only or include real filming? This is a really great question. I think this is like our initial expectations were like we expected most things to be submitted were going to be animation. It looks like there are more people that are interested in doing some film elements than expected. Tony, is there anything you want to add to expectations on that front?
Not really. We were anticipating there's going to be more animation because of the COVID situation, which is why and I'm certainly constantly repeating, to be safe if you are going to do some filming, especially as you can't go outside, especially if you live in Melbourne, like here. So yeah, I mean, to what Heather Daydream was just saying, film animation combo is great, but the idea was always to give you creative freedom. It wasn't to limit you to the normal screen agency's requirements. So yeah, if you're doing film and you have a great idea, that's what's going to do it. And to come to Ethan, Ethan asked a question a little ways away. What are the agencies expecting? It's probably going to be slightly different to us, but we are relying on the agencies to do that early review of applications and to whittle out some of the ones that probably would not make it realistically. By the time they get to us, we're expecting to have a somewhat trimmed down list that our team in the US can go through and make decisions on.
Cool. A couple of people have brought up that like the Queensland situation is much easier for doing any live film side of things, so I can understand that one. Cool. I think that's probably it for the core comments outside of small jokes. Some people have said that. Okay, great. So someone's asked, how would you go about transferring objects or actors or materials from one project to another? That's a really useful thing to be able to do. So I'm just going to quickly tab over to the engine for just 1 second. So if you are in a project and you ever want to move something across, let's say that you really liked the grass in this project, okay? So you're a really big fan of it. You can right click, you can go asset actions and then migrate. It'll force you to save everything first. But what it will actually do is it will actually find everything that the grass uses and you can then copy these. You hit OK, and you just point it to another project's content folder, and it will copy all of those assets straight over, and everything should be fine. Cool. I did turn that on to share screen just then, didn't I? Yeah, okay, good. Sorry. I'm new to this. Okay, any other questions that have popped up? Someone said they're getting Z fighting when they're generally building things. If you're seeing any issues like that, try building 1 meter above 0, 0, 0. It'll help a bit. As far as everything else, great. No, okay, it looks like that's it for the core questions then. Again, so there is the alias that's been set up, so you're more than welcome to reach out to that, which is just sfc-anz@epicgames.com. Yeah. So you're more than welcome to reach out to that email alias if you have questions. We're doing our best to get through them. Again, the training's starting up again, so we've got repeats going on throughout the week. So please feel free to join us. But otherwise, look, thank you very much for your time. Any closing remarks, Tony?
No, all good. Week 2, here we go.
Yeah, week 2, here we go. Woo! Yeah, we're in for the that opening music all over again.
Yeah, actually there is a remark. I think the one thing the challenge has done really, really well is it's kind of broadened people's perspective of what real time can do. So there's a lot of very large production companies who are not necessarily interested in the challenge, but are now genuinely exploring and looking to fund virtual production type endeavors. So I think from every state I've been talking to, there is real opportunity for these technologies to become accessible to smaller filmmakers, and that was actually one of the goals of this project, is to empower small filmmakers to do things that generally only the big people and big folk can do. So well done, like you did this.
Thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully I'll see some of you in the future sessions, and I'm super excited to see the projects that you all have moving forward. Okay, I'll flick it over. Have a good one.
Take care.
Tell me, is this thing on now? I've been working long like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Is everybody with me? It's time to get together, no more enemies. Throw your hands up, can you feel the energy? Yeah, come on, can you finally hear what this means? 20-something years been chasing down this street, running like a wild man, going since 15. Yeah, we're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah. We're feeling inside, yeah. We got the power. Yeah, come on. We got along like a marathon now. Tying up words, making them a bomb now. Tell me, who turned on the alarm now? I got a message when they put it in a song now. I see you later, all the haters got it wrong now. We're touching the lightning, we're coming alive, yeah.